Welcome to Season 2 of The Shift, Stories of Resistance and Resilience, a multi-platform conversation series produced and hosted by me, Mark Travis Rivera, the professional storyteller. I believe that stories have the power to change the world. Through honest conversations and powerful storytelling, we explore how people challenge systems, shift narratives, and transform culture, creating a more inclusive, just, and liberated world in our lives and in our work. Here on this podcast, you'll hear from changemakers, truth tellers, and community builders who are using their voices and their stories to move us forward. So if you believe in the power of storytelling to spark change, you're in the right place. Listen closely, take notes, recognize our shared humanity. This is The Shift. Go. Hello, everyone. I am so excited. Season 2 is already kicking off with a bang with Darnell Lamont Walker, author of Never Can Say Goodbye, The Life of a Death Doula and the Art of a Peaceful End. And today's guest is someone I've admired for years. I can't believe he said yes to me. I'm still kind of shaking and nervous. But today's guest is one of the greatest possibility models I know in today's generation of comedians, storytellers, truth tellers, authors. And we have so much parallel in our lives, which we'll talk about throughout this conversation today. But today's guest is the one, the only, Aida Rodriguez, a
Thank
comedian.
you for that.
Of course, hold on, we have to read the formal bio here. We like to do things official aquí on the shift. Aida Rodriguez is a comedian, writer, actor, and author, a favorite of critics and fans alike, including myself. Esquire magazine declared her, "This is Rodriguez's genius, using comedy to turn pain into progress, to give voice to the voiceless, and to laugh instead of cry." Aida's comedy special, Fighting Words, which is streaming on HBO Max, and she was a standout on Netflix Tiffany Haddish's produced hit series They Ready, which is how I first discovered Aida's work. She is a key collaborator on platforms the Max Entre Nos franchise, which features the brightest up-and-coming comedy talent. Aida was not only a breakout star of the series, but she recently went behind the camera and directed and produced its current batch of episodes. She is a guest writer, excuse me, she's a guest writer for Pop Sugar, the LA Times, BuzzFeed, and Oprah Daily, as well as a regular commentator on The Young Turks. Her HarperCollins award-winning memoir, Legitimate Kid, is making its rounds with critics and the everyday people she wrote it for. She is the host of Say What You Mean with Aida Rodriguez on the Forward Network, a comedy-driven podcast featuring some of the most recognizable names in pop culture, and she is my guest today on The Shift. Welcome, Aida. ¿Cómo está?
Muy bien, gracias. Thank you for that introduction. Sometimes I forget. I appreciate the reminder.
Yes, no, thank you. I was telling all my friends today, I was like, I'm so nervous to have this conversation with Ida. And the podcast is still, the series itself is not new, but it becoming a podcast platform, this is only season 2. So I've been doing it since 2023 through LinkedIn. And so it's still a growing podcast. And so I'm a bit of a audacious person, and I have no problem just reaching out and saying, hello, I appreciate your work. This is who I am. And
I
we
appreciate that.
connected. Yeah, and so I first discovered you through Tiffany Haddish's They Ready, and I
Mhm.
remember looking at you and hearing the stories you were sharing. And I think I told you this one time when we started chatting on Instagram DMs. I said to you, "I see my tias in you. I see my
Oh,
cousins. I see my
mhm.
sister. I see my mom. My sister being more Afro Latina. I see my niece. There's so much about your story that intersects with mine, but also represents my family as a Puerto Rican family. I often there's a joke in my family when my friends see my family pictures. They're like, "Are y'all all related?" And I'm like, "Yup." And so your work has stood out to me since I first saw that series on Netflix, and then your HBO Max special, Fighting Words, and of course your memoir, which I'm going to talk more about later in this conversation. But we always like to start off with asking our guest, who are you outside of the professional highlights I read in your bio?
Um, you know, I am a creature that has been serving my loved ones since I can remember. So, I'm a daughter, I'm a mother, I'm a sister, I'm a tia, I'm a cousin. And I am now just trying to figure out who I am outside of all of those things, just as an individual, because since I was very little, I have been of service. You know, I was my grandmother's translator, my mother's support, and just as I grow older, I really need to, discover who I am outside of all of those things, because I am still a human being and an individual. And it's been really challenging understanding who I am outside of those things.
Yeah.
And I like to be honest. A lot of people, tell their stories of arrival, and I don't quite know if you ever really arrive. I really feel like you always should evolve. And I'm in discovery right now. I'm learning to be just Aida,
Yeah.
and I'm an artist. I know that about myself. I'm very caring about other people, sometimes a little too much to my detriment, where I was thinking the other day, am I not more famous or more rich because I care so much? And sometimes I think, yeah. And, just trying to understand who I am as an individual and what's the greater purpose than all of this, material and superficial stuff. For me, it's important to be spiritually aligned.
Yeah. And I think that's what comes off for me. This is now year 17 of my career, and I started when I was really young. And this year I'm turning 35. And I
Hmm.
remember thinking to myself, because I never stopped to smell the roses, I never stopped to recognize how much groundbreaking and trailblazing I've done, because for me, I'm always striving for more, right?
Yep.
And the running joke for me is I want to be Kelly Clarkson famous. I want to be so wealthy that I can walk around New York City and no one even recognize me unless I open my mouth to talk. I can't sing, so I'm going to play myself like that. But like, I can still be a normal person, right? Kelly Clarkson walks around Central Park, has a shitload of money and does good with it, right? Like she's a good human. And that's what I aspire to, right? I never want to be that kind of person who's so successful that I can't walk to the bodega when I'm in New York, or like go to the beach or go somewhere without having to worry about people watching me or criticizing me. And so it's funny because now I'm in Atlanta, Georgia, and I've been living here now 5 years. And so much of what I'm recognizing is that this city is a beautiful city, but it's a city of dreamers and not doers.
Hmm.
And I am a doer, and I
Yeah.
hustle, and I see that hustle in you, and I recognize that pressure to be the first, right? To be the first to make it out the hood, to be the first to do X, Y, Z, and the pressure that we put on ourselves to maintain that, to
Yeah.
continue to be not just a generational cycle breaker, but a generational cycle starter.
Yeah.
And now, although I'm a little bit younger than you, I'm now asking myself, who am I outside of the work?
Yeah.
We've all
Yeah,
been
that's
saying, who am
important.
I at my core?
Yeah, that's important. And investigating that, it aligns itself with finding your purpose and what you're going to do, because purpose is just, ideal. Like, what are you going to do? What is the action aligned with that? And how
Yeah,
are you going to perform, and how are you going to show up in the world knowing that you're sent here to do something?
yeah. And so I asked every guest this, and I've been curious to see what you're going to say to this, because I feel like you are one of the most vocal people with a substantial platform. As you know, the subtitle of this podcast is called Stories of Resistance and Resilience. And you don't shy away from calling a spade, which is what drew me to you in the first place. You say it like you mean it, you say it the way it is, unapologetically, authentically, um, without hesitation. And I think that people in your industry, and we'll talk more about that a little bit later, don't often do that, for all the reasons that you named earlier, right? Because it impacts how far they can go. But what is your personal concept of resistance and resilience, especially given the time we're in?
Well, I used to think it was fighting, that I thought it was
Mm,
physical. And sometimes if it's required. But I think being resilient and resistant resilient is something that you have to make a decision to be, because things are going to happen to all of us. And whether we have to make a decision about and I think a lot of us do it with subconsciously, whether we're going to survive that or not. And it can be really, it can be very jarring to be in the midst of trauma and, and not know what's going to happen next. But you either know I'm going to get out of here or I'm not.
Yeah.
And that's something I learned very young. So it was something that I've been doing for a very long time, surviving. Being resilient is part of who we all are. We just have to elect it. We have to choose to do it. Resistance is something that, being able to resist um, within what you are able to do, because a lot of the stuff that's happening that we are experiencing, we don't have the power to really change, and it's such a heavy burden to put on individuals to say, you are carrying the burden of recycling or making sure we have good water. If
Yeah.
you have, of course, we have to contribute and do our part. But I
Right.
think there are some entities who have a lot far greater responsibility, and they don't get the onus put on them. They just put us, we're recycling cans and bottles and then people are dumping in the ocean. And it's like undoing everything that we do. But I think resilience and resistance is, it's just part of who we are. We just got to choose to participate and to elect those things that live within us. And I think it's healthy, and it feels good when you do it. And if you are participating for the greater good of people, for yourself, for your community, your family, your environment, it just gives you more fuel. And I feed off of being able to say, I did something that helped other people, or I helped myself, or I stood up for myself. Those things are important. And I think that it's just always going to be a part of who I am. Like I don't do it for props. I do it because I feel like it's the right thing to do. And I think that there's, now that we live in this social media world and there's that attention currency that people thrive, you don't know why people are doing certain things. I celebrate it all if it benefits people, and if it's for the greater good. But I do want to make sure that I'm always in line with why I'm doing things, because
Yeah.
for me, why would I want to exist in a world where people are not free to be who they are and live their lives the way they want to live, love who they want to love, just exist in their own skin and be safe? Why would I not want? It just doesn't make sense to me. And
Yeah.
there are a lot of people who can, but I can't. It's
Yeah.
not how I'm made.
Yeah. And I started rereading your book, Legitimate Kid, in preparation for today's conversation. And it's so interesting because because I didn't read it that long ago, right? Maybe like a
Mhm.
year and a half ago, and it was so resonant. And as I'm re-listening to it, and I'm just like, wow, like it's so vulnerable, it's so honest, it's
Thank you.
so written for our people. Like I know that you wrote it with our people in mind. When I
I
say
do.
our people, I mean those who never got college degrees, those who probably never got advanced degrees, those who grew up in the hood, those who are people of color, those who are LGBTQ, those who are disabled, those who feel illegitimate.
Yep.
You wrote it in such an accessible way, which
Thank you.
I resonate with, right? Because my book Drafts was written the same concept because
Yes, I have your book.
I know you
Right
have
there.
my book. Thank you so much for sharing. By the way, I can't believe you said yes, you would take a copy of my book. So thank you so much. But
Of course.
I remember reading it and listening to it, and I'm just like, she wrote this for us. She wrote
I
this for
did.
the everyday people in our families, those who never made it out of Miami, those who didn't get to go to pursue their dreams, and I always say the unpublished author of my life is my mother.
Of course. Of
My mom had
course.
all these stories in her that she's never gotten to share,
That's
and she
right.
sees her queer son traveling the world, doing what he loves, making a living, an honest living, being a creative entrepreneur, and she still doesn't understand it. She's seen me speak, she's seen me teach dance classes, she saw me produce dance shows, she's read my book, all these, and she still doesn't get it. She's like, people really pay you to speak, and you travel the world, and you get to do,
Mhm, I
yes,
get that.
mommy, right? And it's like it's so, and so your book for me, even listening to it again the second time, and I'm still towards the beginning of the book where you talk about Ecorino, and it was such a difficult moment because I thought of my older sister.
Mm.
I thought of Jennifer and how she was 6 years older than me. and she had to give up part of her childhood in order to raise me, and how she was my first and fiercest protector after my mother.
Absolutely.
The pressure that comes with being the oldest, right? That surface pressure, right? When we talk about Encanto, talking about Luisa's surface pressure. And I guess for me, when I look at you and interact with your content, you saying, I'm trying to figure out who Ida is outside of all those things. Because for so long, those things were tied to not just your survival, but the survival of those you love.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And this is not on the list, but I feel compelled to ask this. I had asked my mother once during an argument. I said to her, "Who did you want to become before trauma deferred your dreams?" And
Oof. Wow.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, that's such a hard thing to even think about, because trauma is so intertwined with my childhood that I don't remember innocence, and I was innocent because I was a child, but I still know knowing things that little kids shouldn't know because of what I was exposed to. And so I've always wanted to be a star. I know that about myself since I was little. I used to put the towel on my head. I used to look in the mirror with a brush in my hand, and that was my microphone. I would act out my scenes. I wanted to be a movie star and a comedian. Like I know that about that I've always wanted to be that since I was little. And I used to entertain my mother when she was pregnant, and I would get, just do the scenes. But I think what I've always wanted to be was free and just free to be me. I've always been surrounded by people who told me what they thought I should be, who I should be, how I should be. And I've always just been, free spirit, and I've always wanted to do what I wanted to do. And today I may want to write a poem, and tomorrow I may want to act out a scene, and then the next day I may want to produce a play, and someday I want to write something for somebody else because I like to see other people um, in the shine. And so I just know I've always wanted to be in the creative space, and I've always wanted to be free to do that. And I feel like at every turn of my life, I have had to fight for it.
yeah. Sorry, I told myself not to cry this episode, but I'm a crybaby, so the tears are gonna fall. It's okay. I'm just gonna keep going because, and I think and what I and so I'm my niece's gay uncle, her uncle, her tío, and it made me think of your gay uncle and how how much he meant. All your uncles meant a lot to you, but how his particular tenderness with you, how that resonated with you, and I often think about, for me, what has always driven me is because I don't want my own children. I'm like, please, I want to be able to give them back. Is being a tío. Being a tío and so everything I've done to this point in my life has been for my nieces and nephews to demonstrate to them what is possible.
Mm-hmm. Really.
And what I will say to you is that I see you as that person. I see you as the person who's in the creative space, who's doing the thing that they want to do on their own terms. And you may not be at the level you want to be yet, or you may not have done all that you want to do. But I think it's a testament for someone like you who comes from where I come from, where we come from.
Thank
Right?
you.
When you don't have the blueprint, you are the blueprint, Ida.
Thank you. I appreciate that very
Yeah.
much. That.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Of course. Because it's like, and sometimes you can't see it, right? When you're in it, you can't see it because you have almost come a tunnel vision, right? Because like survival, right? And survival. And so for me, so much of what this journey has been over the last few years of full time entrepreneurship is I want to stop simply surviving.
Same.
I want to start to thrive, right? Because in my family, there's the victims, they're the survivors, but there's not enough thrivers.
That's right.
And so I'm trying to become that thriver. What does that look like? Right? What does that mean? So I have to ask you this because you speak it like it is. You call out the anti-blackness in the Latino community. You call out the hypocrisy between the Dominicans versus the Puerto Ricans and on the Cubans and all the other things, especially in your book. And I also had a Cubano in man who I did not like, who's
Yeah.
also so there's a lot of parallel, which is And so, anyways, and it brought me back to the Robert Clemente Park in Wynwood. My grandma's house was on 32nd Street, and I think the cross street was Second Ave. And I remember being in that building, and all my tias lived on one side, I lived on one side, my grandma lived on the other side, my great grandma lived on the other side, and all the things. So there was so much parallel around your book that just brought me back to my childhood, to moments that were not great, moments that where I felt like I was the illegitimate one.
Mhm.
And you're not afraid to speak truth to power, even right now, given what we're going on. Where does that, where does the strength to be that person, knowing that it may cost you? Not just at this point, not just your opportunity, it could even cost you your life, right? Unfortunately, because we live in a time right now where political violence is so intense and you do political commentary. And how do you navigate that right now?
All of my heroes employed such courage. And so I always think about what does it cost you to say something and what does it cost you to be quiet? And
Mm,
so when I think about all the stuff that happens to us as people of color, Black people in this country, it doesn't matter. We got to stand up. We have to speak up. For me, it's hard to be complicit in your own oppression. And I think for me, that's what's always driven me. I saw it at a very young age. I saw my grandmother slap the captain of the police department in Miami, um, and go to jail. I saw my uncles fight cops because they were abusing a disabled man in our neighborhood. They were beating Louis up. They did it in front of me, and my uncles jumped in and started fighting the cops. And they could have been killed. And
yes.
they weren't, but they could have been. So I've always been around people that fight for the rights, the right of others. Like my family, my Puerto Rican family has always been people that do not tolerate, they stand up for people who are vulnerable. um my mother hit somebody in with a block, with one of those cement blocks, because they hit my queer uncle, and she threw the block and hit him. It's just always what I've seen. I've always seen these people that grew up poor in the inner city, that come from, the East, and they just always just been like, nah, that's not okay. And
Yeah.
I'm willing to die for that. So it's just nurture for me. I was raised in with people like that, who nobody knows their names. They're not, that's why I wrote the book. Nobody knows their names. But I know that they've always defended people, always stood up for people. My uncle Raymond was murdered in Miami by a group of guys, and they beat him up. They killed him. And there's a young man in Miami, Elijah, who is to this day still trying to fight for them to find and prosecute the people who killed my uncle, because my uncle was so good to him and my uncle showed up for him. And so I'm proud of that. I'm proud of being a part of that. And if you're a guerrero, if you're a warrior and that's who you are, you know what comes with that. That's part of the territory. And at least I ain't going out as a coward
Right. That
and a
part.
and a bully. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? Like, you see these people who are, you know, beating up young Black people and young brown people and abusing people. That's your
Yeah.
legacy, bro. That's what you leaving behind. Your
Yeah.
great grandchildren will hide your name and hide who you are, because they will be embarrassed to be connected to you as we continue as to evolve as humans. And that won't be the same for me, because I stood up for what was right. And so did Raymond, Pedro, Carlos, David, Richard. They all stood up. Margarita, my grandmother, Aida. They always, you know, there was no bullying around them. Somebody was hungry, they were getting a plate. Even if we didn't have a lot, we would divide it. We would
That was
factor
me
in.
last night. I had a friend come over and he's going through a hard time, and and he hit me up last minute. He's like, I'm by your house. Can I stop by? I'm like, I'm a grandpa. I'm going to bed early. I was like, I have a big day tomorrow. I'm interviewing Ida Rodriguez. I got to be at my A game. I was like, I can't stay up late. What you want? He's like, oh, I'll just stop by for a little bit. Okay, what you want? Mara, can I eat? I was like, well, I didn't cook dinner tonight, but I have this and this and this. What you want? Okay, I'll
You
make
make
that
it.
right. And because how I was raised, similar to you, was that we may not have much, but when it comes to giving someone a couch to sleep on, a pull-out couch, when it comes to giving someone food, what we had, we made do with, right? And I think that's why your book needs to be read by all Latinos everywhere, in my opinion, everyone in the world, regardless of identity, but Latinos, especially Latinos who grew up in the hood, especially Latinos who are not just acknowledging their Afro Latinidad and the connection to the African diaspora, but those who are deeply committed to being anti-racist and to stand up against anti-blackness, even within our own communities, our own families, our own friend
Mhm.
groups, because they need to see this blueprint that you've created, a legitimate kid.
Oh, thank you.
And it resonates not just across race and gender and sexuality, right? Like on the surface, you and I could not be more different, right? You are a cis woman. I am a feminine gay ass man, right? We're both
Mhm.
Puerto Ricans. And there's all these things that you don't recognize that we may have in common. And that's the power of storytelling. That's why my mission is to embrace the power of stories to create a more inclusive world, because the stories that we tell, the stories that we consume, create mirrors and windows. Mirrors
Absolutely.
that people can see themselves reflected, and windows that people who don't see themselves reflected can get a better understanding of a lived experience different than their own. And your
Absolutely.
memoir, Legitimate Kid, has not just served as a mirror for me, but it's also, I know, a window of insight for so many people. Um,
Mm.
how did you how did you feel writing the book?
So the book was it was very cathartic because it was therapeutic, in fact, being able to metabolize the stories of my life in that way. But it was also discovery because as I was writing some things, I learned a lot of stuff as an adult about little me, because we judge each other, we judge ourselves, our past selves, by our present selves, and our selves have the benefit and privilege of an evolution and education that our past selves didn't have, and we can be really hard on our past selves. And so I wanted to give grace to that little girl that I never really gave grace to. There were a lot of things that I was able to write about that I experienced firsthand, and I didn't understand what was happening. Like
Mm,
my uncle Carlos, when he passed away, I was never able to grieve him because the people who thought that they were the number one on the call sheet for grief wouldn't allow me to grieve him. I was too busy caring for the people who, because I was a child, people undermine that children experience grief for loss. And so I was able to finally grieve him when I wrote his chapter of the book, and able to give him what I felt he deserved from me as an adult, because I was never able to give it to him as a child. And you know, you carry that with you. I marvel at people who can talk about loss distantly because it is so much a part of who I am. My five uncles have always been this transformer that they put themselves together and are the greatest man that I ever had in my life growing up. And so, sitting down as a woman now, thinking about what happened when my uncle died, I was in the room when he died. And when they took him off the machine, and I had to translate for my grandmother in that moment because my uncles were wrecked. And I was there to be support. I was there to be the translator and to be support. And nobody realized that I was watching the machine being turned off for one of my lifelines. My uncle was very, very important to me. And that book was able to take me back to a place that I hadn't been in a long time because I was too busy taking care of others. And so for me, writing the book was able to just have my own moment with each of these people because it had always been shared with other people who I'm his mother. Nobody loved him more than I, that's how our families are. I nobody can love him more than I love him. And I'm his sister and he was my best friend, which is my mom.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was my uncle and he was my father, uncle, friend, guardian, protector, because he was my greatest protector. And he was someone that I spent a lot of time with by myself. I went to visit him in prison with my grandmother when my mom didn't.
Mm.
I would spend every Sunday with him because he would take me to the park and he would box while I played. So it was I had a lot of time with him. I used to write him when he was in prison because nobody else was writing him and he would write me back.
Yeah.
So I don't think people understood because they're like, you're just a kid. You're just
Yeah.
a kid. I was a human being who lost one of the most important people in her life. And and I cried so much when I wrote this chapter. I cried throughout the whole time because I realized that I was never really allowed to grieve. And if I was cry, they would shut me up. They would be like, yeah, 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 yeah. Like I didn't really understand. When my great grandfather died, I was destroyed. And they couldn't understand because it was my great grandfather, but that was the patriarch of my family, the only man I've ever called Papi in my whole life, and a person that I used to see every Sunday who used to cook for me. When he would go to the grocery store, he would take me, hold my hand, I would cross the street with him. I was his first great granddaughter, and writing this book, it just allowed me to really understand that people really undermine children and their feelings and what they experience. And so I was able to go back in time and give her that because
Yeah.
nobody else is going to give it to her.
Yeah. This is also not on the list, so I apologize, but I felt my spirit is
Okay.
trying to ask you this. How would you complete the following statement? Little Ida, you are legitimate because.
Just because. And I think that that is one of the things that we have to practice in our lives because we're always searching for the things that validate us and make us legitimate. We are legitimate just because. How are we going to be here on stolen land and letting other people who are not legitimately here determine our legitimacy, validate us? How? That is, on a spiritual level. And all these people who speak of legality and even morality don't realize that spiritually, they're going to have to answer for all of the misdealings, the ills, and the evils that they have rained upon people on this planet. All
Yeah.
debts are paid.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter what you believe in. That is just, those are universal laws. So I have started to say that I am legitimate just because before I had a laundry list of what made me legitimate, and a lot of that was rooted in patriarchy, systemic oppression, white supremacy,
Yeah.
religious indoctrination. I am legitimate because I am here.
Mm. Mm. Thank you. Thank you for answering that.
So are
Uh,
you. Right.
we're, I know we're almost at time, but I want to ask you this final question that we ask every guest because I think it's important. What do you hope to shift in society through your work? And what is next for you?
Something. I want to shift something. I I want to leave, and I know that we think about this and on such a macro level, and we never realize what we're doing on our own micro level, right?
Mm,
So for me, I used to think about changing the world from a perspective of I'm gonna light up the sky with my name,
mm,
Irene Cara. But I think that one of the greatest things I can leave here, one of the things that I can shift is what's around me. If the majority of the people and more people than not say that because they knew me, their life was better, that is a great accomplishment and something to leave behind. That if you ask 10 people that knew me and nine of them say, I'm better because I knew her. She
yeah,
impacted me in this way. She was kind to me. That matters to me. And I think that is what I wanted to shift. Now, on a greater level, I would love for Latinos, Latinx, Latinx people to really have a presence in media because media affects the way we feel about ourselves,
yeah,
and that we get to an opportunity to own our narratives and our own storytelling,
yeah,
and that we find a way to do it regardless of what the industry says. That's where I want to see us really shine, not the machine telling us, okay, you can tell a story, you can do a movie, but us just collectively deciding that we are enough and we have what we got, what we need to make it happen.
yeah,
And I think that's important. And I really would like to be a part of that movement.
yeah. Well, thank you. I know we started a little bit late, so I apologize, but thank you so much for,
Thank
I'm not
you.
someone that knows you personally, but I can just say that you can count me as one of those 10 people in your orbit now who have been deeply impacted by your existence.
And you sending me messages of positivity and in those moments of insecurity when my book first came out, and you sending me a message telling me how my book affected you. You know, when white women are taking me down on Goodreads and talking about how my book isn't funny because the book wasn't supposed to be funny and people
Right.
expected it to be funny because they like to laugh at our trauma and our pain. And
Yeah.
so you also have had such a positive impact on me. So thank you for showing up for me. Even on social media, I see you, and which is why I responded to you because I know that it comes from the best place.
Yeah.
And what is being who I am in this business and doing what I'm doing if I'm inaccessible to the people that I'm doing it for?
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. I always tell people because they get these younger generations, like they're like, "Oh, how many followers do you have on social media?" And I was like, "Do you know I have my real life Rolodex? Do you even know what a Rolodex is?" I was like,
Yeah,
"There are
exactly.
people in my life across sectors, across industries, who, when I call them, when I reach out to them, because they know that about me, they know that when I reach out to them, it's always with the utmost care and respect, And for me, I know that I could have used your book when I was growing up. When I
I
was
wish I could have
first
read. Ooh.
ver but it's the idea around not being legitimate. Out of my father's 8 children, I'm the only one who doesn't have his last name. I've been there
Hmm.
for over a decade, right?
My
Since
brother
2010.
has six that have his
Yeah,
last name
right, and are you the only one that doesn't have his last name? Yeah,
of his six children. Yeah.
yeah, and there is a and even and as a queer man, right? As a man, I had to recognize that my father was the first man to ever tell me, "I love you," but
Hmm.
I've been dating men who would say those things to me time after time after time. And I realized that I was allowing a script of not being enough, not being lovable, not being legitimate, impact me. And reading your book, which is what made me reach out to you initially, beyond just like, talking about your upcoming performances and stuff, was about this deep yearning for me to feel legitimate. In my
Hmm.
professional life, I'm confident as fuck,
Of
right?
course.
I have the track record, I have the success, I have the impact reports. I know what the hell I'm doing, right? I've been doing this for a long time. But in my personal life, I wish in my personal life that I had an ounce. of the confidence that my professional self has. And so, so much of the last couple years has been learning how to show up confidently in my personal life just as much as I do when I'm speaking on stages or perform choreographing or teaching or speaking or lecturing or writing. And there is no separating my professional self from my personal self. That it's all one self.
That's right.
And that every version I've been, every version I'll become, and who I am right now is legitimate. So thank
Absolutely.
you. Thank you,
No,
Aida, for being a
you.
possibility model. Thank you for being a guest. Y'all be sure to check out Ida's work, her special Fighting Words on HBO Max, as well as her segment, her episode on They Ready, which is available on Netflix. Y'all, please, please, please make sure you link and buy her book. We're going to link in the show notes for you from a non-major conglomerate where you can go and buy her book, Legitimate Kid. Buy one for yourself, buy one for your titi, buy one for your sisters, buy one for your primas, buy one for your gay uncles. Just buy them for the relatives in your lives and anyone who you may know who may be struggling to feel legitimate. And most importantly, for Latinos listening to this conversation, you know, we can't say we want stories represented and then not show up for people who have the courage or the ability to share their stories, right? Because at the
Oh,
end of the day, we still live in a capitalist world. And so if you're craving for more and more of our stories, but you're not actively putting dollars, right? Actively putting your support behind fellow Latinos who are doing this work at a larger scale or any scale, then
that's
you are
true.
part of the problem. And so the days of being passively a fan, right? I don't know you, right? So I'm a fan of your work, right? But after this conversation, I've realized I'm an admirer of who you've shown yourself to be. And
Thank
that
you.
means that you have my support for the rest of my life on this earth and hopefully in the
Oh,
afterlife.
thank you. That means the world to me. I really appreciate that.
Y'all check out her book, Legitimate Kid. Be sure to like, rate, subscribe. Also, make sure you check out her podcast, Say What You Mean, available on all major platforms. Check out her website, funnyaida.com, right? Did I say that right?
See me where you see me live. Yeah. I have a
Wow.
movie coming out in the fall called Hurricane Seasons
Okay,
with Justina,
period.
yeah, with
Yes.
Justina Machado and Carlos Ponce. It's a Elvis Nolasco is a very like great cast of people who supported me.
Yes.
This is my first starring role. And I'm working on my new special, which I'm shooting in the fall as well. So good things
Lovely.
ahead.
And you also just launched your Substack, correct? You just
I
launched Substack.
did. I did. I owe them a story.
Yeah, so make sure you subscribe to her Substack. She releases excerpts of her book. She also listens to her upcoming show stops. And if she's in your city or town, get there. Trust me, you will appreciate. She is a prolific storyteller whose intellect is only matched by her wittiness. And
Thank you.
support our people, support those who support us. Thank you all so much. Be sure to like, rate, subscribe, share this podcast with the people in your life. And of course, above all else, be well.
Thank you.